They crumpled up, mown down as quickly as I tell it. Their reinforcing waves coming on bravely and steadily, to fall over as they reached the front line of slain and wounded. Our rapid fire was so appalling, even to us. Such tactics amazed us. And after the first shock of seeing men slowly and helplessly falling down as they were hit, gave us a great sense of power and of pleasure. It was all so easy.
Though the British held their ground and inflicted huge casualties at Mons, French forces along the line were pushed back and the Allies forced into a general retreat. The German army marched on, driving through Belgium and into France. At the same time, along the German-French border to the southeast, the French army had gone on the attack in an attempt to advance into German territory. It became known as the Battle of the Frontiers.
Deprez and I riveted our gaze on the lofty line of hills to the east, which stood between us and destiny. Yonder were others like ourselves, men who would kill us if we did not kill them.
French soldiers marched head-on into German guns.
All around us, high explosive and shrapnel shell of every caliber kept bursting and strewing the position with bullets and splinters. Death seemed inevitable.
As the French army was repelled, the Germans in turn went on the offensive. The Battle of the Frontiers turned into a French disaster.
The French lost something like 200,000 men in the first month of the war alone. And this is one of the great images of the old French army, attacking in colourful uniforms, officers wearing white gloves, and they were massacred as they came up against the rifles and machine guns of the defending Germans.
As thousands of French were led into captivity, German soldiers swiftly advanced deeper and deeper into France. Paris was in their sights. By early September, they were crossing the River Marne, just 30 miles east of the French capital. The French commander-in-chief, General Joffre, received a desperate appeal from the military governor of Paris, General Gallieni.
Our artillery is old-fashioned. Ammunition is lacking. The troops are insufficient and poor in quality. Our capacity for resistance is small.
Gallieni then did something extraordinary. Short of proper military transport, he commandeered all of Paris's taxis to carry his troops to the front line and join Joffre's armies. Joffre now unleashed a French and British counterattack, which stunned the German army.
We had the Germans on the run. Our tails were up now, and we were different men, veterans in a way. A good many of us had fought 3 battles at the age of 20.
The Battle of the Marne was the turning point of the first year of the war. The German advance was stopped in its tracks. Germany's commanders knew it was a crushing blow.
The German offensive on the Western Front has been wrecked. The miracle of the Marne has saved France.
Why it was called a miracle was that it was so well disguised, so well delivered, that the Germans were taken entirely by surprise. Suddenly, all their plans, all their ambitions were shattered. And in fact, at that moment, the war really became a war that was destined to run on for a very long time.
At the same time, on the Eastern Front, on the other side of Germany, these first weeks of the war had seen fast-moving waves of attack and counterattack involving Germany, its ally Austria, and their opponent, Russia. It had begun with the Austrian invasion of Serbia, which had triggered the outbreak of war in the first place. It had not been the smooth operation the Austrians had hoped for.
The Austrians, when they invaded Serbia, were full of a mood of, let's punish these wretched Balkan monkeys and we'll show them what the army of a great power is worth. And they forgot that the Balkan monkeys had been fighting for quite a time and were much more experienced than the poor old Austrians were. They hadn't really fought a war at all since a very little one in Bosnia a generation before. So they manoeuvre rather pretentiously when they attack Serbia and got very bloody noses.
Within 6 weeks, the Serbs drove the Austrians out of Serbia. At this time, the other half of Austria's army was also in action, engaged in a savage fight with Austria and Germany's far more significant enemy, Russia. When war broke out, the Russian army was the strongest regular force in Europe, with nearly 1.5 million troops. But despite the modern-looking armoured cars proudly displayed by the Tsar's commanders, his army was cumbersome. One British observer wrote that it seemed rather like
a heavyweight, muscle-bound prize fighter who, because of his enormous bulk, lacked activity and quickness, and would therefore be at the mercy of a lighter but more wiry and intelligent opponent.
But the Russian army surprised everyone by quickly advancing 150 miles into Austria, to the shock of Austrian soldiers.
We were thunderstruck that the Russians had penetrated so deeply, but the despondency which followed this startling revelation was quickly replaced by the intense excitement of meeting the enemy so soon.
Fritz Kreisler quickly saw action.
A man about 20 yards to the right of my company leapt into the air with an agonizing cry and fell in a heap, mortally wounded. Then I suddenly felt a gust of cold wind strike my cheek as a big shell fragment came howling through the air, plowing the ground viciously as it struck. We lay on the ground, panting and exhausted, my heart almost bursting with exertion.
In the face of the Russian onslaught, the Austrians lost 350,000, dead, wounded, or taken prisoner. At the same time, to the north, the Russians were also invading eastern Germany. The German commanders, Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff, gathered their forces to resist the Russian advance. On August the 26th, the Russian and German armies collided at what would become known as the Battle of Tannenberg. An English eyewitness described the unprecedented scale of the fighting.
The front of this terrific battle was very extensive, and the Russians claimed to have 3 million men in action. Close fighting is more often and more extensively resorted to than ever it has been previously, even in the open field.
Tannenberg was a famous victory for Germany. Its commanders celebrated.
One of the most brilliant battles in the history of the world had been fought. The battle was a glorious triumph for every officer and man, and the whole country. Germany and Austria-Hungary rejoiced. The world was silent.
Nearly 100,000 Russian soldiers were taken prisoner. 50,000 more were killed or wounded. Within weeks, Germany had repelled the Russian invasion. Now it was determined to try again for a breakthrough in the West. On October the 19th, 1914, the Germans attacked British and French forces at the town of Ypres in Belgium.
The First Battle of Ypres was in many ways the defining moment of the conflict on the Western Front in 1914. It was the last spasm of mobile warfare, the last real opportunity for the Germans to break through.
A great grey mass of humanity was charging, running for all God would let them, straight onto us, not 50 yards off. One saw a great mass of Germans quiver. I have never shot so much in such a short time.
The 3 weeks of this first Battle of Ypres brought a new and awful scale of slaughter.
On our front, we appear to have lost thousands, killed, wounded, or captured. And what have we to show for it? One trench. What a waste of life. Not only life, but young life.
Ypres defined the war on the Western Front for the next 3.5 years. A stalemate, fought from trenches and dominated by death and discomfort.
At that particular time, there was no drainage system in the trenches, so that most of the time the trenches were knee-deep up to your thighs, slopping about in water and mud.
The trenches begin to look gloomy now, with the dripping of rain and darkness coming on. Mice scuttle over the path as I go to my rounds, and a rat pops over a sandbag on top of a parapet. Work begins again at stand down. There are more sentries, a party for water, a working party to improve the parapet and wire, and so on.
Several of our men were awakened to find a rat snuggling down under the blanket alongside them. There are millions. Some are huge fellows, nearly as big as cats.
You had to stretch whatever rest you could from pure exhaustion, and only to find there are starving rats running over you and gnawing at your equipment.
Those blasted lice keep quiet if you're nearly frozen. As soon as you warm up, they start to bite like the devil.
Oh, you were itching all over. The damn things used to feed on the blood. You perhaps turn your vest inside out to get rid of them. And the next morning you'll be just as lousy as ever because the eggs lay laid and hatched out during the night. So it's just as lousy as ever. You might just as well have saved your time.
One sees things from a very different standpoint out here. The seeming uselessness of it. Day after day in the trenches, with great exposure, and very little really happening. Of course, occasional bombardments, and it is wonderful what men can put up with. There is little sleep for the officer. There is a continual round of duty, continually on the watch for any signs of attack.
As autumn 1914 turned to winter, to the men on the front line, the early promises of a quick war had all but faded.
You don't know how boring and nerve-wracking this trench business is, and how long off the end of the war seems. It would appear that it has to go on until the Germans are quite exhausted, which might take some little time. Well, Flume, this is a dreadful war. And now they've started using grenades and bombs with great frequency. It's a little worse than before. Some of the lines are only 25 yards apart and are full of water and mud. It's awfully cold and wet too. And I'm sure that none of the 10 million or so combatants would mind if peace were declared tomorrow.
At Christmas 1914, such thoughts of peace led to one of the most remarkable incidents of the war. In some parts of the line, soldiers on each side put down their guns and met in no man's land.
And there in the searchlight they stood, Englishman and German, chatting and smoking cigarettes together midway between the lines. A rousing cheer went up from friend and foe alike. The group was too far away for me to hear what was said, but presently we heard a cheery, "Good night and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all." with which the parties returned to their respective trenches. After this we remained the whole night through, singing with the enemy, song for song.
Both sides' high commands would ensure that such fraternizing never happened again. The soldiers who had rushed to war were beginning to realize what their leaders had let them in for.
In those days, your brain, what shall I say, wasn't developed enough to realize what war was. And everybody said it'll be over by Christmas. Now Christmas came, there was